My name is Oleg Shakirov. I represent Peer Center, research institution in Russia focused on international security, and I will tell you briefly about critical information infrastructure protection in Russia. So in Russia, we will not go far into the history of this topic, but if we focus on the immediate past, there is a very clear definition of what is critical information infrastructure, and it is based on the federal law on security of critical information infrastructure that was adopted in 2017, and that is now foundational for organizations that are involved in this field. However, it defines critical information infrastructure quite broadly. There is no, so this list of sectors on the slide is not something that you have in this law. It's just a list of sectors that are where subjects of critical information infrastructure can be. So this could be government, private, non-government organizations that are that maintain information systems related to health, science, transportation, communications, energy, finance, etc., etc. So as you might see, this spectrum is quite broad. In a sense, it overlaps with the classification of critical information infrastructure in other countries, but in some senses it may be broader. So, for example, we have science identified here, but for example, public administration or government bodies are not clearly identified in here, but basically any government agency that is involved in health, so for example Ministry of Healthcare, would be critical information infrastructure subject. So critical information infrastructure subjects, they maintain critical information infrastructure objects. These are systems that involve some information systems or automated systems in these particular sectors. This law is quite lengthy, and right now we are in the process of its implementation. There are multiple regulations that are that stem from this particular law. Some are sectoral. For example, I will speak briefly about healthcare, and so it's a work in progress. So there are many agencies involved in this process, but there are two key agencies. The first one is called the FSB. It is Federal Security Service. We'll speak more about its activities in this field. And another one is called STEC. It's an agency that is a service that is subsidiary to the Ministry of Defense, but it is responsible for protection of information. And so it has a big role in regulation in this field. It develops some regulatory acts. It also maintains Russian version of military database of tactics, techniques, and procedures. And so it's quite active in this field, and it usually reaches out to critical information infrastructure subjects in terms of regulation and how they should implement it. So one interesting feature of critical information infrastructure protection in Russia is that we have this system, which is called, in Russian it's called Gossopka, in short, but the full name is that State System for Detection, Prevention, and Elimination of the Consequences of Computer Attacks on Information Resources of the Russian Federation. So basically, it's kind of a nationwide security operations center. The way it's supposed to function is that, and speaking about critical infrastructure, so all subjects of critical information infrastructure, they need to establish their own centers to monitor computer incidents, and all of these centers need to be connected to this nationwide system, which will ensure some data sharing and ideally in the future would give the government kind of a nationwide whole of nation, whole of government, and whole of sectors vision into what is happening and what types of attacks are happening. It's really hard to tell now to what extent this has been kind of implemented, but the ambition is quite big, and we'll see how it goes. So going back to these key agencies, so Gosopka is maintained by the Federal Security Service. There is another institution which is called the National Computer Incident Response and Coordination Center. It is another entity, also subsidiary to the Federal Security Service, and it's basically Russian national CERT. So it was established quite recently, I would say, and it is responsible for issuing warnings about vulnerabilities. It is responsible for some kind of general awareness raising activities, and it's a contact point for organizations that want to report incident. So there is kind of some overlap with the Gostopka, but it's not only for critical information infrastructure agencies. This can be for other organizations as well. So one kind of big topic in Russia right now and in this particular field is import substitution. So there are many objectives that import substitution aims to achieve. For example, it is supposed to help Russian IT firms. It is supposed to kind of be a response to this kind of confrontational behavior from other countries. But in this field of critical information infrastructure protection, it is one of the kind of efforts to increase the security in this field, and it is quite it's a difficult job, because many organizations that are classified as critical information infrastructure, and if you go back in my presentation, you remember that there are many sectors, and there could be some overclassification. So some organizations that would not otherwise be labeled CIA, they might be technically defined as CIA, and thus they will be required to basically substitute their software with the domestically produced software. So there is another, again, those two agencies that I spoke about are not the only agencies involved. So import substitution is the responsibility of the Ministry of Economic Development, of the Ministry of basically Information, Communication and Digital Development, so kind of Russian Ministry of all things digital. And they keep on kind of negotiating and bargaining about the deadline for replacing foreign-made software with domestically made software. I haven't checked what is the current kind of state of this debate, but a year ago it was 2022. By the end of this year, the Ministry of Digital, they proposed to push the deadline further by about 2024, 2025. So the regulators, I mean the security guys, they want to have it implemented sooner. So it's kind of back and forth. And from some public reporting, we've seen that not all of these kind of organizations that are in charge of managing critical information infrastructure, not all of them are in a hurry to replace software that they've been already using with something new. So it's kind of it's a work in progress. We'll see, but it's a big topic in Russian security community, because there are some types of software that are easy to replace, I would say. For example, antiviruses and security products in general. But it's been kind of going tougher with kind of general purpose software, for example, Office, like alternatives to Microsoft Office, etc. And so it's moving, but it's moving kind of slow. And some people say that it's not, it does not necessarily make security CII assets more secure, and that there are kind of trade-offs as usual. So let's focus on some sectors. So in healthcare has obviously been the target of many attacks recently, and so in Russia, I was looking for specific examples. This one on the slide is the example that has been cited quite often, and the reason is this: such incidents in Russia are not as kind of often reported as in the United States. So, for example, we will have cybersecurity companies reports where they would highlight that the number of attacks on healthcare organization is rising, but they would not cite specific examples. And so we don't know the scale. We don't know about kind of mass instances of hospitals being infected by ransomware. But there are some individual cases. For example, in this situation, a hospital department in Sverdlovskaya Oblast, in the region of Sverdlovsk, it was basically attacked by a ransomware virus, and they had to kind of delay some of their work. In other situations, Russian hospitals have recently been targets of data stealth, and some hospital, I forgot the exact region, but they reported that some of their data was stolen and was kind of being sold on darknet, and they were being ransomed for this. So again, we don't have only those two agencies that I spoke about, the Federal Security Service and the STEC, but we have other agencies involved. In this case, of course, we have the Ministry of Healthcare involved, and like other sectoral government agencies, they are working on specific regulation for this sector. So, for example, last year, the Ministry of Health, they issued basically methodological recommendations for classifying critical information infrastructure objects in the healthcare service. So it's a huge document which basically lays out how individual organizations how they should define what are and what are not critical information infrastructure assets that they maintain. So another sector that is, I would say, has been at the forefront of critical information infrastructure protection in Russia is finance and banking. For several years, the Central Bank of Russia maintained this FinCert, so basically cert for financial sector. It is going through some transformation now, but they've been quite active, and this year they reported, for example, that during the pandemic, the number of attacks on financial organizations, on banks, was quite low, but attacks on users, on customers of these banks was high, and so this kind of tells you that they've been quite successful in ensuring that banks, they comply with the regulation. Yeah, sign that says, I may be experiencing network connection difficulties, but I hope everything is all right. So basically, they managed to secure banking sector, and the Russian cybercriminals or foreign cybercriminals, they switched to attacking Russian users who are much more vulnerable nowadays. Yeah, so one topic that I wanted to touch upon is the critical information infrastructure and foreign threats. I'm kind of a foreign policy professional first, so this is something that I find amusing. So in 2019, we had a story. I'm sure some of you might remember it. That so the New York Times reported that some U.S. agency implanted malicious code in Russian power grid, and this was presumably done to for some deterrent purposes in the response to similar Russian activities, and presumably in case something went kind of sour, the United States could do something. So of course this happened in June 2019, and this triggered all kinds of responses from many newsmakers in Russia, from the foreign ministry, from Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson of President Putin, from special services, and all of them were quite kind of. There were two messages. One was reassuring that everything is protected and we are secure. Another message was that we know that the United States is among the main foreign adversaries who is constantly targeting Russian critical infrastructure. So we are not surprised about this story. And then there was this comment from the Ministry of Energy, again, another ministry that is responsible for securing information, critical information infrastructure in this particular sector. And they've been, they were not very specific, but they were quite reassuring, and they said that everything is protected. And they said, I think it's interesting, they said that not all, but most critical entities are connected to this state system. If you remember the system that I talked about, Gossopka, so basically nationwide SAC. Yeah, so this is one example. And in cases like this, we don't see often, we don't see detailed reports, we don't see detailed kind of attribution. So Russian officials, they like diplomatically, they are opposed to public attribution. They think it's not useful. But on the other hand, they signal that they know that there are foreign threats against Russian critical information infrastructure. So they kind of acknowledge this, but without much detail. So this year in January, we've seen quite an interesting message from this national authority. They issued an advisory saying that because there are persistent accusations against Russia by the United States and its allies, and threats to retaliate, this national authority, they recommended Russian critical information infrastructure subjects to implement certain measures. And there is a list of 15 pretty nonsense measures that they suggest should be implemented. So it includes different measures from kind of basic cyber hygiene to more kind of sophisticated efforts and data sharing as well. So in general, there is this like not constant, but there is frequent mentions of some potential or existing foreign threats, foreign attacks against Russian critical information infrastructure assets, but it's not kind of widely known about any particular incidents. But for example, recently in late April, the head of this Russian CERT, he announced that there were some foreign threats from I think from the United States, from Europe, and I think from China, targeting a Siberian laboratory that produces both Russian test kits for COVID-19 and one of several Russian vaccines for COVID-19. And I think he meant that hackers targeted Russian research of this COVID vaccine. But again, there is not much detail, and you can only kind of guess what was the exact scope of this attack. So to finish up, I would like to briefly touch upon the place of critical information infrastructure protection in Russian kind of diplomatic efforts. So Russian diplomats are take great pride in the fact that it was Russia who introduced this topic of information or cybersecurity to the United Nations. It was in the 1998 that Russia proposed this first draft resolution that was adopted in early 1999. And since 2002, it was since 2002 that the United Nations General Assembly actually included a provision related to not like critical infrastructure, but the integrity of state infrastructure. And this exact like phrase has been moving from preamble of one resolution to all the subsequent resolutions adopted under this agenda item. So last year, during the pandemic, several countries proposed to focus specifically on healthcare sector, and Russia actually endorsed this message. And here we see a quote from Andrei Kruskich, who is basically Russian cyber czar or key Russian negotiator on cyber, and he says that Russia basically agrees that there need to be a deliberate effort to protect health information infrastructure, but he also said that it should not be limited only to healthcare, but should cover other sectors that are vital to society. And fast forward in March of this year, this open-ended working group in the United Nations, they adopted their final report, which includes specific mention of health infrastructure. So it was, I think it was first proposed by the Netherlands, was endorsed by other states. So, and Russia kind of joined this message. And finally, so interestingly enough, critical information infrastructure protection is mentioned in some of Russian bilateral agreements with several states. So Russia currently has almost kind of 10 bilateral agreements. They were adopted since 2012-13. On information security, and these agreements, they include several types of provisions on critical information infrastructure. So most of these agreements, they include a provision saying that basically ICT can have a destructive impact on CII assets. So it was just kind of a statement that this is one of the threats. So with some states, in particular BRICS countries, these bilateral agreements include provisions about cooperation between responsible government agencies in the area of protection of critical information infrastructure. But to be honest, I don't know anything about the implementation of these agreements, but I'm sure that there are some kind of long-term process whereby Russian and Chinese and Russian and Indian agencies, they try to define some specific measures that they can implement. And there is one quite interesting provision in the Russian bilateral agreement with Belarus. It's basically a pledge not to engage in illegal use or unauthorized access of the other side's critically important assets, and well, just infrastructure and critical infrastructure. So I think it's interesting that bilaterally Russia and Belarus, which are part of this union state, subnational kind of entity, they agreed on this specific point. Yeah, so there is definitely much more to this topic, and I just wanted to give you a quick kind of overview of what happens in Russia in terms of critical information infrastructure protection. So if you have some specific questions, I'll be happy to take them and reach out to me in the chat or by email. Thank you so much.